Did you know that 7 out of 10 black people have already been mistaken for criminals in public spaces, even when they did absolutely nothing? That's exactly how it all began. The keychain slipped from her fingers and clattered against the pavement. It wasn't nervousness that caused the fumble. It was exhaustion. The bone-deep kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. Dr. Amara Johnson had been up since 4 that morning, preparing for her first official day as the newly appointed president of Summit Financial Group. The position had been announced internally just 48 hours ago, and today was supposed to be her quiet drive to the headquarters before the formal introduction to the full staff tomorrow. She bent down slowly, her knees protesting after the long drive from the corporate retreat, where the board had finalized her appointment. The black pencil skirt she wore, professional, elegant, carefully chosen, rode up slightly as she crouched. Her fingers had just grazed the metal of the keychain when a voice shattered the peaceful morning air. "Get your hands off my car right now!" Well, the words weren't a question, or even a warning. They were an accusation, fired with the kind of absolute certainty that comes from a lifetime of never being challenged. Amara froze for a split second, her mind processing the impossibility of the situation. She was next to her own vehicle, a modest but well-maintained sedan, in a public parking area outside a coffee shop. But before she could formulate a response, before she could even stand fully upright, the assault intensified. A woman stood 5 feet away, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the overcast morning. She wore cream-colored pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Her face was contorted with disgust, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at Amara like she was something contaminated. "Don't you dare play dumb with me," the woman continued, her voice rising with each word. "I saw you creeping around the vehicles. You people are all the same, fat, black, thinking you can just take whatever you want." The words landed like physical blows, each one carefully chosen, weaponized by years of societal permission to speak such hatred. Around them, the morning foot traffic began to slow. A man in a jogging suit paused mid-stride. 2 women with yoga mats stopped their conversation. A teenager on a skateboard came to a halt, phone already in hand. The street transformed in an instant. What had been a normal weekday morning became a theater, and prejudice was performing its oldest, ugliest show. The audience watched, some with shock, some with uncomfortable recognition, some with the passive complicity of those who believe that silence is neutrality. Amara straightened slowly, her full 5'6" frame rising with deliberate calm. She held the keychain in her hand, her car keys clearly visible, dangling from the fob that bore her company's logo. The same company where this woman clearly felt entitled to everything, including the right to dehumanize a stranger on a public street. She didn't shout, didn't raise her voice, didn't match the aggression being directed at her. Instead, she did something more powerful. She looked directly into the woman's eyes and spoke with a calm that was almost unsettling in its contrast to the chaos around them. "Repeat that. Say it again. Loud enough for everyone to hear." The woman's face flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, that her victim wasn't cowering or arguing or providing the defensive reaction that would justify her behavior. The confidence she'd worn like armor showed its first crack, but it was only momentary. Years of privilege rushed back in to fill the gap, and she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that carried the full weight of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. "You think you're going to intimidate me?" She stepped closer, invading Amara's space with the boldness of someone who'd been taught the world would always step back. "Go ahead. Try to make something of this. You want to sue me? Look at yourself." Her eyes raked over Amara's body with theatrical disgust. "Look at what you are. You think anyone's going to take your word over mine?" The words hung in the air like poison. Around them, the crowd had grown. At least 15 people now, maybe more. Some were filming on their phones. Others just watched, their expressions ranging from horror to discomfort to, most disturbingly, a kind of resigned familiarity, as if they'd seen this performance before and knew exactly how it would end. Across the street, pressed against the windows of a Wells Fargo branch, Several employees in business attire had gathered to watch. Their faces were visible through the glass. All white, all dressed in the uniform of middle management, all undoubtedly recognizing the blonde woman who was currently self-destructing in public. A few exchanged glances. One pulled out a phone. None made a move to intervene. Amara reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out her phone. The woman tensed, that laugh dying in her throat. "You're going to film me." Her voice took on a new edge, something sharper, more desperate. "That's assault, you know. I know my rights. You can't just—" "I'm not filming you," Amara said quietly, her thumb already moving across the screen. She turned slightly away, the phone to her ear, and her voice dropped to a tone that only those closest could hear. It was the voice of someone used to command, used to being heard, used to systems responding when she spoke. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Professional. Efficient. No drama, no pleading, just clear communication of facts and a location. When she lowered the phone, she turned back to face the woman, whose expression had shifted from righteous anger to something approaching uncertainty. "You called the police?" The woman laughed again, but this time it sounded hollow. "Oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what you people do. Play victim, waste everyone's time, make everything about race when you're clearly—" "I didn't ask you to stay," Amara interrupted, her voice still that same unsettling calm. "But you should. You really should stay right here." Something in the way she said it made the woman pause. Around them, the crowd had settled into an uncomfortable vigil. The employees across the street were still watching. Someone's phone was definitely recording now. The morning had taken on the surreal quality of a moment that everyone present knew would become a story they'd tell later. They just weren't sure yet how it would end. The woman pulled out her own phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she typed. "I'm calling my husband," she announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "He's a partner at Morrison & Associates. You have no idea who you're messing with. When he gets here, he'll find you waiting for the police," Amara said. "Just like I asked you to." 8 minutes passed. They felt like hours. The woman paced, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising and falling as she recounted the situation to whoever was on the other end. Amara stood still, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She had the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime learning not to give her emotions away, not to provide ammunition to people who were looking for any excuse to confirm their prejudices. A few people from the crowd approached Amara, their voices low. "We saw everything," a young black man said. "I got it all on video." An older white woman touched her arm gently. "I'm so sorry. That was horrible. Do you need anything?" Amara thanked them quietly, but her attention remained on the street. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing. The crowd instinctively stepped back, creating a space between the 2 women. The police car doors opened, and 2 officers stepped out. They were both black, one male, one female. Both wore expressions that suggested they'd seen too many scenes exactly like this one, understood the dynamics before anyone had spoken a word. The male officer was in his 40s, with close-cropped graying hair and the kind of solid presence that came from years of service. The female officer was younger, perhaps early 30s, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes already scanning the scene with trained precision. The blonde woman's entire demeanor changed. The aggressive confidence drained away, replaced by something that tried to approximate innocence but landed somewhere closer to panic. She stepped forward quickly, her voice taking on a completely different tone. Higher, more feminine, vulnerability performed for an audience that wasn't buying it. "Officers, thank God you're here. This woman," she gestured at Amara. "She was trying to break into my car. I confronted her, and she became aggressive and threatening. I was honestly afraid for my safety." The male officer held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Ma'am, we didn't ask you to speak yet." He turned to Amara, his expression professional but not unkind. "You're the one who called?" "I am," Amara confirmed. She spoke clearly, without rushing, her words chosen with the precision of someone who understood that every syllable mattered. "This woman verbally assaulted me approximately 12 minutes ago. I was retrieving my car keys. She held up the keychain. From the ground next to my vehicle when she approached, shouting accusations. When I didn't respond the way she expected, she escalated to racial slurs and threats. That's a lie, the blonde woman's voice cracked. I would never use that kind of language. She's making this up because… Ma'am, the female officer's voice was sharp enough to cut through the protest. I need you to step back and wait your turn. The officer approached Amara, pulling out a notepad. Can you tell me exactly what was said? Amara recounted the incident methodically, without embellishment or emotional performance. She had learned long ago that black women who showed anger were labeled as aggressive, while those who showed fear were dismissed as weak. The only safe response was this practiced calm, this careful neutrality that turned herself into a reliable witness to her own dehumanization. There are multiple witnesses, she added, gesturing to the crowd that still lingered. The young man stepped forward immediately. I recorded the whole thing, he said, already pulling up the video on his phone. The blonde woman watched this exchange with growing desperation. She tried to interrupt twice, but the male officer raised his hand again, signaling her to wait. When the female officer moved to review the video, the woman's composure finally cracked completely. This is ridiculous, she burst out, her voice climbing back to that original pitch of entitled outrage. You're going to believe her over me? Look at her. She clearly doesn't even belong in this neighborhood. I was protecting my property, and now I'm being treated like… Like what, ma'am? The male officer asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. The woman seemed to realize she was on dangerous ground, but she'd gone too far to stop now. The fear and anger and desperate need to be believed all collided into one final, catastrophic mistake. She looked directly at the officers and said with the full force of her conviction, like I'm some kind of racist, when everyone can see what's really going on here. People like her are always… She never finished the sentence. The female officer turned away from the phone, her expression hardened into professional stone. She exchanged a look with her partner that spoke volumes. A full conversation conducted in a single glance, the kind that only comes from years of partnership and shared experience. Ma'am, the male officer said, his voice taking on a formal quality that shifted the entire energy of the scene. I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back. The words landed like an explosion. The woman's face went white, then red, then white again. What? You can't be serious. I'm the victim here. I called… No, wait, you don't understand. You have the right to remain silent, he continued, producing handcuffs. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The street erupted in murmurs. Phones were definitely recording now. The woman tried to back away, her voice rising to a shriek. No! You're making a mistake! Do you know who I am? Do you know where I work? My husband will… Ma'am, resisting will only make this worse, the female officer said, moving to help her partner. Together, with practiced efficiency, they secured the handcuffs. The woman was sobbing now, her carefully constructed image of superiority dissolving in real time. As they guided her toward the patrol car, the male officer paused and turned back to Amara. His expression softened slightly, not with pity, but with something like recognition, the acknowledgement of one person who'd navigated America's racial landscape to another. Ma'am, he said formally, but with an undercurrent of something else, for the record, and so everyone present understands the full context of this situation. He raised his voice slightly, making sure the crowd could hear. The woman being detained verbally assaulted and made racist threats against Dr. Amara Johnson, the newly appointed president and CEO of Summit Financial Group. The words hung in the air for 3 full seconds before their meaning penetrated. The crowd's murmur became a roar. The woman being placed in the patrol car seemed to stop breathing entirely. Across the street, visible through the bank windows, several employees suddenly stepped back from the glass, their faces showing everything from shock to horror. The female officer, before closing the patrol car door, leaned down slightly and spoke just loud enough for the woman to hear clearly. Summit Financial Group, ma'am. That's the parent company of Wells Fargo, Chase, and 3 other major banks, including the one across the street. The place where… According to your employee badge that's clipped to your pants, you've worked for the past 7 years. The ground didn't just disappear beneath the woman's feet. It opened up and swallowed her whole. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. In the patrol car's window, her reflection showed a face transformed by the sudden, complete understanding of what she'd done. Not just the moral horror of her racism, but the practical, devastating consequences. She hadn't just attacked a stranger. She'd publicly brutalized the person who now controlled her professional future, and that of everyone she worked with. The patrol cars pulled away. The crowd began to disperse, everyone talking at once, phones already uploading videos to social media with hashtags and commentary. The employees across the street had vanished from the windows entirely, presumably scrambling to do damage control or distance themselves from what they'd just witnessed. Amara stood alone in the sudden quiet, her keychain still in her hand. She walked to her car, the modest sedan she'd driven herself because she preferred her privacy to the company driver she was now entitled to, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Her hands, which had been steady through everything, began to tremble now that the performance was over. She allowed herself exactly 60 seconds to feel the weight of it, the exhaustion, the anger, the bone-deep weariness of existing in a world that still, even now, required black women to prove their humanity over and over again. Then she started the car and drove to work. The video went viral within 3 hours. Your Summit CEO and Dallas parking lot Karen became trending topics before noon. News outlets picked up the story by evening. The woman's identity, Jennifer Hartwick, a senior loan officer at Wells Fargo's downtown branch, was public knowledge within 6 hours, despite attempts to scrub her social media presence. Summit Financial Group's response was swift and unequivocal. By 5 p.m. that day, an official statement was released. Summit Financial Group has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. The behavior displayed by Ms. Jennifer Hartwick, an employee of our subsidiary Wells Fargo, represents a fundamental violation of our values and code of conduct. Ms. Hartwick has been terminated effective immediately. We are conducting a comprehensive review of workplace culture across all our holdings and implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all employees. We stand firmly with Dr. Amara Johnson and all who face discrimination. Jennifer Hartwick's name became synonymous with consequence. Her LinkedIn profile, once public, disappeared. Her husband's law firm quietly removed her from their family website. Applications to other financial institutions went unanswered. No company wanted to be associated with that video, that moment, that undeniable documentation of racism in action. The criminal charges moved forward. Assault, harassment, disorderly conduct. The civil suit that followed was settled quietly, the terms sealed, but the damage was permanent. In an industry built on reputation and trust, Jennifer Hartwick had become radioactive, not because the system had suddenly become just, but because her racism had been so public, so documented, so impossible to excuse or explain away, that ignoring it would have cost her employers more than holding her accountable. But while the internet celebrated what they called justice, Amara Johnson continued her work. She didn't give interviews about the incident, didn't write op-eds about what it meant or what it represented. She attended meetings, reviewed financial reports, made strategic decisions about the direction of a multi-billion-dollar company. At her first full staff meeting, attended by over 200 executives from across Summit's holdings, she addressed the incident exactly once. She stood at the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, more diverse than the industry norm, but still predominantly white in the upper levels, and spoke clearly. Some of you know me from my 20 years of work in this industry. Others only know me from a video that went viral last week. Let me be clear. I am not defined by that moment. I am defined by my work, my expertise, my vision for this company, and my commitment to ensuring that Summit Financial Group leads the industry not just in profits, but in creating a workplace where talent is recognized, regardless of what someone looks like when they bend down to pick up their car keys. The room was silent. She let the words sink in, then continued. We will be implementing significant changes to our diversity and inclusion initiatives. Not because of what happened to me, but because it should never happen to anyone. Not in our workplaces, not in our communities, not anywhere. Those who cannot commit to this vision should consider whether this is the right place for them. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't revenge. It was something more profound. A refusal to let hatred define her, combined with a commitment to use her power to create systemic change, rather than simply punish individual actors. 3 months later, Amara was heading to her car after a long day of board meetings when she noticed a woman standing near the parking structure's entrance. She was older, white, well-dressed, and her face carried the kind of careful neutrality that suggested she'd been waiting for a while. "Dr. Johnson?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Patricia Hartwick, Jennifer's mother-in-law." Amara's hand tightened on her briefcase, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mrs. Hartwick, I won't take much of your time. The woman's composure cracked slightly. "I wanted you to know that what Jennifer did was inexcusable. There's no explaining it, no excusing it. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed you to hear from someone in her family that we were horrified. Some of us had no idea she carried that kind of hatred." Amara studied her for a long moment. "Some of you had no idea," she repeated quietly. "Which means some of you did." Mrs. Hartwick's face flushed, but she nodded. "You're right. We saw signs, comments at family dinners that we let slide, jokes that made us uncomfortable, but we didn't want to make a scene. We told ourselves she wasn't really like that it was just frustration or stress talking. We were wrong, and I'm sorry. Your apology is noted," Amara said. "But it's not what matters. What matters is what you do next, in your family, in your community. When you hear those comments, those jokes, whether you speak up or let them slide." Mrs. Hartwick nodded, tears visible in her eyes now. "You're right. Thank you." She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Jennifer didn't just lose her job. She lost her marriage, her friends, everything. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for her. I say it because consequences are real. And maybe if she'd faced smaller consequences earlier, she wouldn't have gotten to the point where she felt entitled to treat you that way. After Mrs. Hartwick left, Amara sat in her car for a moment, processing the encounter. She thought about Jennifer Hartwick, whose life had imploded in a parking lot because she'd been taught that her whiteness granted her immunity. Her status granted her superiority. She thought about the countless other black women who'd experienced similar moments without cameras, without witnesses willing to speak up, without positions of power to leverage for accountability. Victory, she realized, wasn't watching Jennifer Hartwick fall. Victory was being able to walk through that parking lot now without fear. Victory was the young black analyst who'd approached her last week to say she'd applied to Summit because of what happened, because she finally believed there might be a place where her talent mattered more than her appearance. Victory was knowing that the next time someone dropped their keys in a parking lot, maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to pick them up without becoming a spectacle, without having to prove their humanity, without needing a position of power to be treated with basic dignity. The street that had watched that morning would never forget what happened. But more importantly, neither would the people who'd stood silent, who'd filmed but not intervened, who'd watched prejudice perform and done nothing to stop it. The video would circulate for years, a teaching moment in diversity training, a cautionary tale in business schools, a reminder of how quickly privilege can turn to consequence when the audience finally decides to care. But Amara Johnson didn't need the video to remember. She carried that moment with her, not as a wound, but as a reminder that dignity isn't given, it's maintained. That power isn't just about having authority. It's about using it to ensure that someday, authority won't be necessary for people to be treated as human. She started her car and drove away from the building, away from the conversation, away from the weight of other people's expectations about what her story meant or should mean. Because at the end of the day, she wasn't a symbol or a cautionary tale or a viral video. She was a woman who'd worked hard, earned her position, and refused to let someone else's hatred define her worth. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the consequences Jennifer Hartwick faced, but the fact that Amara Johnson kept moving forward, kept building, kept leading, kept existing in her full humanity regardless of who tried to diminish it. The street that had been an audience would tell this story for years. But Amara was already writing the next chapter, one where she didn't have to perform her worth for anyone, where her presence was statement enough.